Hello again, welcome back to this tutorial series. And in this brief tutorial, I'm going to go over some aspects of methods. And what I want to show you what I did first is that you'll see in Lesson 2, the Lesson 2 Object-Oriented folder, I'll have the first class.css right here. In the first class.css, I created my first namespace as far as I declared my first variables. And I get and set all those variables. I created my first constructor and also a second constructor that passes my variables to the local parameters inside of it that can be reused inside of this constructor, then passed to other methods, initiating an object of this class. Well, what I did is that, remember I told you that in ASP.NET website, anything that's in the app_code folder is what gets compiled at runtime. So I created another class that says first class 1 right here. And in first class 1, I implemented some of the same type of logic, but I specified some items. What I did first is I created a private read-only variable for each one of these types, right? And then I set each one of these public ones to initialize them inside of the first constructor here. So you have the private read-only variable first, second, third, fourth, underscore, and then it's being set to these first get and sets of these variables themselves. So it initializes them. Then once it initializes them, it sets it to each one of the public variables here. And the reason behind this is that it's a better chance for none of the variables to be null when they're passed to the constructor. So in this case, this is why I instituted this logic if I wanted to call this second constructor passing all of those methods and variables. I mean all of those variables inside of the constructor itself. So now, once you know how this logic works here, I'm going to start instituting something called methods. And the first thing you need to realize with methods, there's two different types of methods here. One is a void method right here, and one is not a void method. That's right here. Now both of these are public. You can institute these as private if you wanted, but typically with methods you don't institute them as private, you institute them as public. So let's go back to public here, right? So in this case, with a void method, it doesn't return any value, and it doesn't have to return any type of specific type of value. Like in the non-void method here, excuse me, it returns a string type. So the string type in this case is return this.firstString, and firstString is the value that I have right here, which is a string value type. So with non-void methods, they must return a specific type of value, in this case a string. If you don't have a return type, you get an error, and the error is that new objects expression must be used in this statement. Only assignment, call, increment, decrement, await expressions must be used. So in this case, you must have a return method inside of a non-void type of method. And in this case, with the public void first method, what it's doing is console.writeLine, it's writing hello. So in the next tutorials, what we'll end up doing is, in our methods, we can pass parameters in these methods, kind of like we did in the constructor, and then we can write out those values from the variables, or any type of thing that we want to implement in this logic we can. So with the void method, since it doesn't return anything, we can take whatever is in here and then write it out and do any type of SQL logic that we want, or whatever that we want to implement ourselves. But I just wanted to introduce to you that with methods, they can be void, which they can write out any type of information, doesn't return a specific type, or they can be non-void methods that have a specific type, and that specific type must return that type back out. Like in this example, firstString will return firstString here. So in this case, you know, if you're not going to parse that value, let's say for example here, let's say first double, right? What we got here, you can't explicitly convert a double to a type, but what then you can do is call the public one, public global method, the toString, and then you can set it to a toString value. And then that will give it to you there. And then we can have kind of our custom code there to give it an invariant culture. Well, don't even worry about that. That just gives it global culture, more specific in our coding. But that's a way we could parse the first double variable here to a string. And that's how we have to return, and it reminds us that we have to return that string type. Also, instead of first double, let's take first int. So if we had first int, well, of course, what would happen there? We'd have to do the same thing here with toString. So that's another example of how that must be worked. So let's say we're going to take this to an int. Now what? Well, we don't want to have the toString method, right? So we have this.first toString. So the key to this is that in a non-void method, always remember what type is being returned from that method when it's called. And remember, with a void type, nothing has to be returned. Something can be written out, such as a string builder or anything of that nature. In the next tutorial, we'll actually start going over arrays, and I'll show you how to implement arrays within methods, within using those arrays. You can even pass variables to your arrays and then write them out inside of a method. Sky's the limit what you can do with implementing different methods as far as your logic is concerned. If you're building SQL or you're just writing out strings, there's so much you can do with these different methods. And towards the end of this section, I will actually show you in an ASPX page some of these methods that we're writing out and putting them into variables or bulleted list items, and I will show you that towards the end of this tutorial. I want to thank you for joining me in this tutorial, and you have a nice day.